Hey, this is Jamie from Stonemaier Games, a tabletop publishing company, but today I'm talking about video games. Specifically, games that do not start out as tabletop games and then become digital games. Like we have a game called Wingspan. Wingspan has a digital port. I'm not talking about that genre of games. I have a different video about that. You can see that in the comments below. Rather, I'm specifically talking about games that are either only or are originally video games, console, mobile, or PC. I'm talking about my favorite games in this genre. And I should make it very clear that I have played so many more tabletop games than digital games. If you're looking for a great comprehensive list of the best video games out there, the best mobile games out there, the best console games out there, I am not the person to go to. But I thought I'd talk about the topic today, at least with some context relating to tabletop games, because I have learned a lot from even just watching like Let's Play videos and reviews about digital games in terms of the way that I approach tabletop games. So without further ado, let me jump into this list. And I'll as I go through my top 10 lists, I'll talk about, actually top 12 lists, I end up with 12. I will talk about those different correlations and connections to tabletop games. So Stonemaier Ambassadors, people who volunteer for Stonemaier Games, selected a bunch of their favorites. I asked everyone to select their favorite video game, and a few of the games that came out multiple times among these ambassadors were Assassin's Creed, Bioshock, Civilization VI, Diablo, Final Fantasy, Halo, Horizon Zero Dawn, Mario Kart, Pokemon, Skyrim, World of Warcraft, and Zelda. Some of those games have various iterations, like there are different versions of Zelda. I kind of consolidated that into Zelda. Same with Final Fantasy in particular, and Pokemon. Pokemon had a few different games in there. My honorable mentions, so video games or digital games, mobile games that I really enjoyed, but didn't quite make my top 12, were Void Tyrant, Griftlands, also Civilization VI, Command and Conquer, one that I played as a youngin' back in the day, Baba Is You, Sonic the Hedgehog, another one that I played on the portable Sega that they came out with many years ago, Super Mario Brothers, the original, Stupid Zombies, a fun light mobile game that I have, Jetpack Joyride, another mobile game that actually now has a tabletop game version of it, and Stardew Valley, another game that also now has a tabletop version. Stardew Valley came very close to making this list. I think it's a brilliant game, but it's also one that I never really got sucked into. Like, it's a game that I admired and I really appreciated, and it has strong connections to tabletop games, but I just never got sucked into it. And with that in mind, I have my top 12 here with a game that I very much got sucked into, even though it is probably, I don't know, mechanically inferior to Stardew Valley, to those games I just mentioned, and that is Brizzle. I don't know if you've heard of Brizzle. It's, I don't even know if I'm saying it correctly, but it's essentially the word bird with ZZL attached to it, Brizzle. It is a mobile game that I played on either my iPad or my iPhone that I had to delete because it was so addictive. It's one of these match 3 games where you have little birds that are dropping from the sky, and you're trying to move them so that same colored birds group together, and those groups disappear, and then more fall down based on where they were eliminated, and if more line up, then those disappear, and you can even create chain reactions. And it's just one of these very satisfying mindless games. And where I think maybe the most satisfying thing about it, other than creating those clusters of birds, these square birds, they don't really even look like birds, but also trying to get as far as possible. And I think that is interesting, one interesting element of video games, in that many of these games, you were just trying to get as far as you can. Whereas in tabletop games, almost always, you are either winning or losing. There is no element of duration or endurance or longevity. You play for a certain amount of time, and the game tells you the game is over, and you either win or you lose at that point. So I think that's interesting. There aren't too many tabletop games that, in fact, I can't even think of any examples offhand that do that, where you're just trying to last as long as possible. There are some cooperative games like Hanabi where you don't, there is no like black or white win or lose condition there. Rather, there are varying degrees of cooperatively winning. So that's maybe the closest comparison I can think of, but maybe you have some better examples in the comments below. At number 11, I have a game that is a lot older than Brizzle, and that is Tetris, but very similar to Brizzle in that things are dropping. There's this element of gravity in the game for some reason, and things are shapes are dropping and trying to fill in different rows so they disappear. And the reason I wanted to put Tetris on this list because A, I played it a lot when I was younger, and B, it uses polyomino tiles. And I found in tabletop games, polyominoes are a huge part of the Euro game space right now. Some of my favorite games, like A Feast for Odin, Patchwork, use polyominoes. Tapestry, my game Tapestry, uses polyominoes in these 3D buildings that you're trying to fit into your city grid. I wanted to mention here both because I love it and because I think Tetris may have subconsciously had a huge impact on the tabletop game industry because of this polyomino shape and how satisfying it is to fit things together and fill spaces with oddly shaped tiles. So yeah, Tetris is my number 11. At number 10, I have Zelda Breath of the Wild. Zelda could have easily been at the top of the list. However, as someone who doesn't typically play video games, I have tried to play Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I've played maybe a couple hours of it. But the controls are just beyond me. I could probably figure it out if I really sat down and really wanted to learn it and play a lot of it. I'm sure I could figure it out. But the camera control in particularly threw me off. Whereas I think a lot of people who are used to playing these 3D open world games are very used to just controlling the camera with one hand and controlling the other stuff with the other. I'm not used to that. So I had a hard time actually playing it. However, Zelda Breath of the Wild has had a huge impact, perhaps even the number one impact game on this list on me as a designer, because when it came out, I became absolutely enamored with the idea of an open world that just says yes, where you figure out what you want to do, and the game allows you to do it, both with a physics-driven engine and with essentially just a vast open world. The game is never saying you need to go here first and then here. The game is never saying you can only go in this one direction. You can walk around in any direction in a fairly large world. The game is also saying, hey, do you see that thing over there? You can get there. You can figure out how to get there. Maybe not right away, but you can figure out how to get there. There's so much that I love about this game based on those core concepts, and it has been a huge inspiration for the open world cooperative game that I've been working on in the tabletop space. That still has a long way to go. It's a massive game. I've been working on it since Zelda Breath of the Wild came out on console, which I think was, 2017, 2018? A long time ago. So I've been working on this game for a long time. But it continues to be just a huge inspiration. And I'm actually really looking forward to the sequel and watching reviews and thoughts about the sequel so I can even learn more about it as video gamers talk about the sequel as well. So Zelda Breath of the Wild, probably the number one inspiring game, but in terms of gameplay that I've enjoyed and maybe even gotten addicted to, I'd put at number 10. At number 9, I have another game that's actually influenced my open world as well, and that is Subnautica. And Subnautica is a game where you drop onto an ocean planet, and it appears at first glance like a survival game. But the game actually uses survival only for the first few hours in the game to teach you some of the core concepts, which are really exploration. And again, it's very, very open. You have this vast ocean beneath you, and you are constrained by a few things like food and water and oxygen, but you figure out those things pretty quickly. And then you can just go exploring and find out what is beneath you in this ocean world. And again, I love those core concepts. I love that it isn't a survival game. I think survival games are a very popular genre among video games, but that can often feel punishing to me, and I much prefer rewarding games and games that say yes to me rather than the games that say no actively all the time. And so I love that Subnautica just says yes, go explore, go wherever you want, look around. And also the crafting tech tree. I love technology trees. I love engine building in tabletop games. And I think Subnautica does that really well with its extensive tech tree. So Subnautica is the number 9 game on this list. I'm going to harken back. I mean, this has got to be the oldest game on this list, and I don't even know the official name of it. But at number 8, I have the X-Men arcade game. I'm 40 years old, so that means I was born in 81. I grew up in probably the late stage era of arcades, but definitely, I mean, when we wanted to play video games as a kid, before Nintendo came out, we went to the arcade and played games. And my favorite game to play at the arcade, other than maybe, pinball? What's the bowling game that you play? But that wasn't a video game. Probably the number one game that I always wanted to play was the X-Men arcade game, where I think up to maybe 5 or 6 of us could gather around this giant arcade console, and we each picked an X-Men character and would join forces to fight a series of bad guys. And I just had so much fun with it. I loved that it was cooperative. It was definitely the first cooperative game that I ever played, where we were working together to fight these bad guys. And I also loved that each player had at least one really special power. So there was always some moment where you were like, okay, we need Colossus to do this. I think I often played Colossus actually. We need Colossus to do this and set up this big energy blast, and one player the Colossus player would step up and do it. And that just felt so good that not only were we working together, but at times we really relied on each other's special abilities to do that. It's definitely a button masher, and we were just sitting there mashing buttons, but I really, really liked that. I would say, even though I didn't put it on this list, I also did enjoy Street Fighter. I enjoyed Street Fighter back in the day, but that was a 1v1 game. I think this was an early sign that I would come to really enjoy cooperative games in the future. That is the X-Men arcade game. If anyone knows the official name of this game, let me know in the comments below. And number 7, I have another very old game, one of the games I played as a teenager probably in the early 90s, and that is Heroes of Might and Magic 3. I'm pretty sure it was 3 that I played. That was the major one. The idea in this game is that you were a person on a horse, and you would just roam out throughout the world, exploring stuff, finding and essentially stumbling upon sometimes enemies, sometimes other players, also treasure chests and just things that you would discover and gain into your inventory. And I don't know, it was a really, really satisfying game to play. And I think maybe my favorite thing about it, other than the exploration, I loved settling onto this map and just finding out what's there and trying to build up your force before other players found you. But I think my favorite thing was that combat wasn't real time. Because I am not a huge video gamer, I don't have those like instinctual real time reflexes in a video game. And so having combat where you kind of set up your forces and then the opponent sets up their forces and then you just say go, and that part, the game runs itself at that part of combat, was really satisfying to me. I could take as much time as I needed to think about how I needed to set up my forces before pitting them against an opponent. So I thought that was really clever. I remember this about the game. I enjoyed extending my range because I think that's a major constraint in the game. Normally on a turn you can only move like an inch on the screen, but the more you play, the more you build up your endurance or whatever stat it was. You could go further and further. And there are certain times in the game where you watch the opponent go, and you are hoping that they don't reach you because you are not quite ready to have that combat with them yet. I don't know. I had a blast with this game. I had a lot of fun with Heroes of Might and Magic 3. I'd love to hear, if you remember better than I do, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. In college, there were 2 games that I really loved. One is higher up on this list, but the number 6 game on my list is Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. I remember it as the pod racing game because it is that. You are a pod racer where you get to choose from, I believe you chose your own pod, just your own pod. Maybe you could combine pods and kind of build your own. And I think there were improvements too that you could make to your pod, but at its heart, I really enjoyed the racing part of it. It really felt like I was in Episode 1 racing a pod racer. The graphics were fantastic, I thought, for the time. The feeling of the pod jerking forward and sailing, the physics behind it felt really good. It felt really, really real. And I had a blast with it. I really, really enjoyed this pod racing game. I think in general, in video games, more so even than tabletop games, I enjoy racing games. Although I have found that the one sports-themed game that I really enjoy in the tabletop space is racing games like Downforce. So I think racing games maybe just work really well for tabletop and video game consoles. But pod racing, I just had a blast playing it in college. It was just a very, very satisfying game to play due to those racing elements and being able to pick which pod you felt was better equipped against the other pods out there. That's number 6. At number 5, I have The Witness. The Witness, I think, is one of the most brilliant games I've ever played. And I actually only played a sliver of it. Mostly this is a very recent game. My girlfriend Megan played through The Witness, and I would kind of chime in and join and try to help out from time to time when she wanted help or when I wanted to just watch for a little bit. So I actually didn't play all that much of The Witness, but I played enough of it that I think I can legitimately put it on this list. But it is very much a puzzle game where you are really, it sounds so simple. If you haven't played it, it will sound overly simple, but you are encountering these little screens within the game, and you are drawing a line to connect one dot to another, typically. And sometimes you will connect it the right way, and the game will unlock the next thing, unlock the next mini game, or unlock some other part of the island. And sometimes you'll get it the wrong way, and you'll have to think about, okay, why was that? What was I not paying attention to, either in this world or in this series of mini games? Because in The Witness, there are often these series of mini games where the first one starts out with a very simple instruction, and you just follow that instruction. Maybe it's, and it doesn't tell you what it is. You're not reading instructions on the screen. You were just doing a thing and figuring out a rule. So it might be as simple as like, you must go through all blue nodes on the screen. And you don't know that, but then maybe by chance you draw through all the blue nodes and you're like, oh, okay. And not only have you done that by chance, but also maybe you found some context clues in the world that point at, like maybe you're near some blue flowers, and those blue flowers are kind of pointing to you at the idea that you want to connect these blue nodes. And then the next puzzle in that series uses that rule, and then maybe it adds another rule to it that you also have to figure out. But it made me think about gaming tutorials a lot, because never in The Witness is it saying, this is how you need to do this puzzle, or this is how you need to do this. You are figuring it out as you go based on the information provided, based on this escalating series of mini games, and based on the context clues in the environment in which you actually need to use your eyes to look around and see what's in the world around you. There are even games behind that beyond that I don't want to spoil here, but that to me I thought was such an important lesson about tutorials and ramping complexity in games. So you can start out with a very simple rule and then scale up, add another rule and make it more complex. You don't need to jump to the thing that shows players all the rules, because even the act of learning rules in games, as The Witness can show you, showed me, can be very satisfying and be very fulfilling. So yeah, The Witness, brilliant game, number 5 on this list. And number 4 is Hearthstone. And Hearthstone is a game that I actually avoided for a long time because I was worried about getting sucked into it. I've experienced at a certain time in my life where Magic the Gathering Online was really taking up way more of my time than it should have. And I'm not counting Magic the Gathering Online as a game on this list because it was based on a tabletop game. But I don't know if I quite want to use the word addicted here, or addiction, but it was somewhat close to it, where I would. My instinct when I had some free time was just always to play Magic the Gathering online. And so I was worried about feeling that same way about Hearthstone. I really was. And so I didn't play it, even though I heard great things about the card game. But I eventually did try it. I was like, okay, I will try it for a week and then let it go. And I did. And I totally became fairly addicted to it that week. And then I let it go. I didn't play it much after that. Because Hearthstone does really everything it can to make you feel really good the more you play. And especially if you play every day, there are little rewards, you get little bonuses. It feels really satisfying to open a pack of cards on Hearthstone. I didn't think that they'd be able to capture that as well as actually opening like a real pack of cards in real life, but they did. They added sound effects and an explosion. It feels really good. And just like the progression as you're getting more cards into your deck, you're crafting your deck more and more, you're going against harder and harder opponents. And just the core gameplay of Hearthstone, where you are ramping up the amount of resources that you have every turn. So it's never like in Magic where you can get mana screwed. Rather, you have a certain amount of mana, whatever they call it in Hearthstone, and then you get one more than that the next turn, and then one more the next turn. And so you have this kind of built-in ramping element to the game where you feel more and more powerful the game progresses, and you don't need to do anything to earn that. The game just gives that to you, and so you get to pretty much always feel good about the more and more powerful spells that you're casting over the course of the game. And it even does some things it does actually quite a bit with digital cards that you can't really do with tabletop cards, with paper cards. But yeah, the whole package of Hearthstone just comes together so well, and in many ways it feels like a tabletop game. It feels like you're playing a dueling card crafting game, but it also fully leverages the things that a digital game can do that tabletop games can't do as well. So that's Hearthstone, my number 4 game on this list. And number 3, I have the one game on this list, I think, other than maybe arguably X-Men arcade game, where you are truly active during the game, and that is Beat Saber. We have an Oculus Quest, and for a while we were really into Beat Saber. I'm sure we'll return to it too. We haven't played it in a little while. But in Beat Saber, basically you stand still and wait for these boxes to come at you, and you are trying to slash through these boxes, sometimes in a specific direction, sometimes whatever direction you want, you can slash through it. Oftentimes there's an arrow saying you got to go through the box in this way. It feels like you have lightsabers in your hand, which is awesome. B, I love that I don't get disoriented when I play Beat Saber because I'm sitting in one place, the things are coming at me instead of me moving my feet. So I like that. There are times where you might duck under something or move a little bit to the side, but really it's just a little movement can get you from side to side. But I think the biggest thing about Beat Saber is the link between the music and the boxes. I think that is just a lot of fun, that you get to listen to good music while you are being active in a game, and how the music, the beats of the music correspond to the sequence and the position of these boxes that are hurtling at you. That feels really good. It feels really satisfying. It feels I don't know. It feels like I've done some exercise after I do Beat Saber. I'm often out of breath after playing it, but I also got to listen to fun music while I'm doing so. So I think I don't know. It's a really clever, fun game in Beat Saber. There's also a game that I arguably could have put on here as well. I think it was called VR Box. I think the name has changed over time. But it's one where you, instead of like Beat Saber, instead of using lightsabers, you are boxing. You're boxing these things that are coming at you. And that felt very satisfying too. I really enjoyed that one as well. At number 2, I have probably the closest game to a tabletop game, and it will even have a tabletop game in the future when they figure it out, and that is Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire is a deck building game where you are not really even building your deck during the core motions of the game, which are you are fighting enemies. So you are playing your cards in your deck to reduce these enemies' life to 0. And then once you do that, you move on to the next level. And at that next level, sometimes it's more enemies, sometimes it's a special treasure or a special encounter. And even in between these things, you are always gaining something. Maybe you're gaining a little reward. You're almost always gaining a new card to add to your deck. And you can also, again, digital format here, you can also upgrade the cards in your deck. A card that maybe deals 5 damage, you can choose to upgrade it so it deals 8 damage from now on. The thing that I think is really brilliant, I mean, there's so many, I have a whole video where I go off on Slay the Spire and how much I love it. But the thing that I think is really brilliant about this game is that in most deck building games, you on your turn you might be fighting some stuff. You might be opposing an opponent or the AI, but you're also using your cards to gain as resources to gain more cards into your deck. Where Slay the Spire says, no, we're just going to give you some cards as long as you survive. So the whole point of the game is to survive and fight off these bad guys and live longer and longer as you go up the spire or go towards the spire. But the deck building part of it happens outside of that. So they don't need to build resources into the cards themselves. Actually, I have to mention that, though. The other thing that I think is really clever, that I don't think I'd seen in a deck building game, even though it seems obvious now, is that Slay the Spire doesn't just let you play out your whole hand. Rather, you do have a certain number of energy, I think they call it, that you can spend each round. And so if you have, I think typically you have 3 energy to spend, and if you have... so you have some cards that cost 0 energy, some that cost 1, and some that cost 2. I don't know if I've seen any that cost 3, but there's probably some out there. But you have to decide in your hand, you get this hand of cards, and you have to decide, am I going to spend a lot of energy right now, or am I going to spend all my energy for this turn right now on this one card or these 2 cards, or am I going to space it out and play these more weaker cards? That I found to be a really interesting choice as well. There's many other things. You can check out my video on Slay the Spire if you find this interesting, but I really do enjoy Slay the Spire quite a bit. That's my number 2. The number 1 game, though, I have to give it to the game that I've definitely played the most of, had the most fun with, and just brought together a ton of friends when we played it in college and even after college, and that is Mario Kart 64. Now, I know there are versions of Mario Kart that have come out that look better after Mario Kart 64, but I never really found one that gave me the sense that I was control. That gave me the sense of control that I did in Mario Kart 64. It's a little hard to describe, but just the way that the kart felt on the track. I felt the most connected to it, and maybe it's just because I played it the most, more than other ones. I even got like the GameCube version, which looked beautiful, it looked amazing. It had more courses, had more stuff. But it wasn't as satisfying for me to play as the Mario Kart 64, the one on N64. We played it over and over again, and I think my favorite mechanism in it are the shortcuts. Getting to know those courses really well and using those shortcuts or attempting those shortcuts with a chance of totally failing and falling back on the course, I thought was really, really clever. I also like the different bonuses that you get and how they're scaled based on your position in any given race. I think that was a really clever addition to always make you feel like you have a chance in this race even if you've fallen behind. And that being in first place isn't always the best thing in a game of Mario Kart, and at least not until the last round of each course. But I just had so much fun playing Mario Kart 64, and so I wanted to mention it here. I don't know if it has a great correlation. Like the idea of shortcuts doesn't translate all that well to tabletop games. It's hard to keep secrets like that in tabletop games, but it can happen. But Mario Kart 64 does use that catch-up mechanism, and there are plenty of tabletop games that use catch-up mechanisms to make players feel like they always have a chance, that they're still in the game, even if they feel like they're pretty far behind. I guess the last overarching topic, now that I've covered that, so Mario Kart 64 is number 1 on this list. I'm curious to see if, looking at the list here, if there's any of these games that I'd love to see on the tabletop, if any of these I think would translate to the tabletop. And I'm curious about you as well. Are there any digital games that you really, really love? Any video games, even mobile games that you really, really love that you'd love to see on the tabletop? For many of these, I can see ideas that have come over to the tabletop space, like the whole Match 3 space of Brizzle that is in Tiny Towns. Mario Kart 64 and Pod Racer, some of those mechanisms are found in racing games like Camel Up or Downforce. Slay the Spire, I think, was inspired by deck building games. So it took its inspiration from tabletop deck building games and brought them into the digital space. Same with Hearthstone. It was inspired, I think, by Magic. So it's neat to see that there are digital games inspired by tabletop games and vice versa. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. If there are any mechanisms that you love in video games that you haven't seen in the tabletop space, or specific video games that you'd love to see tabletop versions of, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And also, feel free to mention your top 3 favorite video games of all time. Maybe mention one console game, one mobile game, and one PC game, if you'd like. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And even one arcade game if you want, since I put arcade games on here. All right, thanks.